Chapter 7. It was an unusual table group, Cass decided. Deegan Hill crouched over his notebook, one hand cradling his head while he scribbled with the other. His eyes were half closed. He looked like he was almost asleep. Cass would have believed he was, except that his other hand moved swiftly across the page. Meanwhile, Ellis McAllister could not keep still. He had a collection of small objects on his desk, and he was moving them around. Sometimes he knocked them down while making explosion noises. At other times, he stuck them together with paper clips that he had twisted into small fragments of wire. Cass was fascinated as he skewered together 2 eraser chunks, some folded paper strips, a pipe cleaner, a broken pencil sharpener, and 2 thumbtacks. Suddenly, a little robot emerged from beneath his hands, sturdy and strutting with attitude. Ellis trotted the robot across his desk while croaking a marching tune. Cass couldn't help snorting. Next, Ellis lifted the robot, squinted, lined it up. Activate! The robot soared through the air and hit Deegan squarely in the forehead. Deegan shot to his feet, startled with a hand to his head. Sorry! Ellis scrambled to retrieve the robot from the floor by Deegan's shoes. I thought you were asleep, just trying to help. Deegan sat down again, his eyes like coals but saying nothing. She thought it was funny, Ellis said, gesturing at Cass. Cass flushed with guilt. I did not. You were laughing. Deegan flicked a glance at her from under his hair. Cass said fiercely, I would never laugh to see someone hit someone else. I was only laughing when you made the robot go across the desk. I didn't mean to hit him. I was just keeping him awake, Ellis said reasonably. I already said that. It was a mercy mission. Leave me out of it, Cass snapped, hardly able to believe the strong words coming out of her mouth. Then she hunched down, her nose almost on her work. Her insides were turning over horribly. Ellis would go after her now, she was sure of it. But he went back to humming and assembling the pieces into a little truck, complete with wheels made of the wrestled-off metal ends of pencils. Something rose up inside of her, like faraway memories of voices calling in triumph, and as if the mask knew what she had done, knew how much bravery it had taken, and hailed her. At recess, Deegan shot out of his chair, notebook in his hand. Although their table group was almost at the back of the room, he was the first out of the classroom. Cass understood. She would always try to get a head start before the bullies could follow. She wanted to tell Deegan that. She wanted him to know she wasn't like Ellis. Outside, she stood on the pavement and looked around. Unfamiliar kids ran everywhere. Cass crossed her arms and started to walk in no particular direction, eyes down but still searching for the boy with the fringed dark hair who would probably have found a place as far out of sight as possible. That was what Cass would have done after all. Hey, Cass, I was hoping I'd see you. Mr. Gregor fell into step beside her, beaming down. Confession time. I was actually looking for you. Have to know how's it going this morning. Everything okay? She flushed, thinking about Deegan. Yes, she said brightly, except it wasn't. Except someone thought she was a bully, and she had to let him know she wasn't, that she knew what it was like to be the victim, and she could never stand by and watch it happen to someone else. She wasn't like Ellis. What did you do in class? Did you meet any kids? Somehow words came out of her mouth, but she wasn't really paying attention to them, and Mr. Gregor was chatting back, but she wasn't really noticing his words either. And your mom, what's she up to today? Cass came back to the conversation. I think she's looking for a job. Ah, said Mr. Gregor. Can you please tell her again that I'd be happy to look over her resume? I really do know a lot of people besides Bessie. I will, she said. At that moment, a kid stopped them. Mr. Gregor, that guy over there fell down and now he's crying. Excuse me, Mr. Gregor said to Cass. See you later, Cass said. She walked quietly past everything. Deegan had to be around somewhere. The trouble was, it was hard to look for him without looking at everyone else. So she kept glancing up and down, heart bouncing in her chest. She found him at last, around the back of a portable, hunched against it with knees drawn up. His head was bent over the notebook, and his hand moved swiftly, sketching something. Cass stood there in front of him, trying to figure out what to say. Just then, a figure bounced up beside her. So this is where everybody went, Ellis shouted. Cass jumped and let out a sound that was part frustration and part terror. He had followed her. Please, Please leave me alone. I'm not bothering either of you. I'm just drawing. Deegan spoke in a soft, level voice that reminded Cass of the distant rumble of thunder. In one smooth gesture, Ellis leaned down and grabbed the notebook. However, his fingers slipped and the book turned like a wheel, flying out of his hands. All three stared as it arced in the air and dropped down directly into a puddle. Cass leaped forward and retrieved the book from the puddle. It was dripping wet with mud. She wiped it on her coat, both sides. I'm so sorry, she gasped. All the words she had hoped to say about not being a bully were now scrambled in her head. She stared helplessly at the notebook. The picture was half covered in a brown smear. Even under the mud, though, she could see what he had been drawing. There is a man crouched on a cliff, maybe ready to fly or to dive. His face was twisted with eyes not quite the same size and a lopsided, smiling mouth. Masses of hair floated around his face. She drew in a breath sharply. Something in the man's face was very much like her mask. I didn't mean to, Ellis said. Ellis grabbed the notebook again, but she held on. She winced, expecting him to hit her now, but she couldn't let him have it. Rip! Then her eyes filled with tears as she stared at the book in her hand. Ellis had torn out half the pages. The man on the cliff had been ripped in two. Ellis stared at the pages in his fist too, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was holding. Deegan said in a low voice to Ellis, It doesn't matter to you, does it? It doesn't matter what I think or what I am inside. I'm just a target to you, just a joke you keep making. Ellis looked stung at this. He frowned, and Cass could see him trying to think what to say back. Well, at least my family paid taxes, Ellis snapped at last. Unlike you, you Indian.